Hello and welcome to today's video. In today's video, we're going to look back at the cash flow forecast one more time, and also we're going to talk about flexible furlough.
Told him I can be a fighter if you want. I'll be there to catch you if you fall. I can make it brighter when it's dark, I told him I would do it all for you, and I know you do it for me too.
Hello, my name's Aaron Patrick. I'm a chartered accountant and also a certified UK trainer. Today we're going to have another look at cash flow forecast and see how that's continuing to evolve within the QuickBooks product. And we've got a particular reason for it today because we need to think about it in terms of flexible furlough. The flexible furlough scheme is something that's just been announced by the government. And basically what happens is it gives an opportunity for an employer to bring someone back on maybe a part-time basis if they're already furloughed. Now, when they get brought back, you have to pay them at their full rate, their normal salary. But when they're not coming back on a full-time basis, or they're there on the part-time basis, the days when they're still furloughed and they're still back in the office, or now anyone you bring back to come and work for you full-time, you need to pay for them on a full-time basis. To take advantage of the flexible furlough, you can bring an employee back who's currently on the furloughed scheme, and you can bring them back on a part-time basis. So maybe you want to bring them back on a staged approach. Maybe you want to bring them back so they're here for parts of a day, or maybe a certain shift, or whatever it's going to be. Now, as the owner of a business, you're going to have to think really hard about how your business can afford to bring people back. Because for most businesses out there, when they're starting to bring back, they're starting to ramp back up, they're not going to come back to the same capacity, the same output that they were doing pre-COVID-19. Therefore, we've got to be careful as business owners to make sure that we can afford to bring people back. We need to understand what's the maximum that we can do, and we've got to make sure we can understand with our employees how that's going to affect them. So with QuickBooks, we can use that brand new cash flow forecast tool to help us understand the impact of bringing staff back, and then we can make a decision as to how much or when those employees can start to be brought back into the business. Now, there's loads of adjustments that's happened to the furlough scheme, including the reduction in terms of how much money is going to be brought in from the government. So we need to make sure we're prepared for this. We need to be looking ahead. We need to be making sure that we can from a cash flow point of view, we're going to be able to survive the next couple of months. So let's have a look at it. Let's have a deep dive into it and see exactly how QuickBooks can help us going forward. Okay, first of all, let's take a step back and let's have a look at exactly what the cash flow forecast has done for us so far. You can see here, I've activated that widget. So at the moment, we've got this cash flow widget here, which is looking backwards. It's letting us know pre-COVID-19, pre-last 12 months, how our business was doing. And you can see with this particular business, we're always surviving, but it was a very lumpy sort of approach. Therefore, from our point of view, when we're looking forward, we've got to be really, really careful. We started to see a bit of a bump here, but then as COVID hit, we were really waiting for that money to come in from the government to keep us alive. Now, we only have a set amount of budget to go forward, and that's where the cash flow forecast can really help us. So on the left-hand side, I'm going to go to the cash flow area. And from a cash flow point of view, I personally like to move it to cash balance straight away to understand how I'm going. Now let's ignore projected for now. On the left-hand side, we've got exactly the same information we got on that widget. So now we can understand and we can see how our business is doing. And then what QuickBooks is going to do, as long as we've got a connected bank account, what QuickBooks is going to do now is going to take that information and it's going to start predicting how our business is going to do in the next 3 months. Now, this is critical for our business. Our business needs to understand exactly how the impact of all these adjustments are going to do, and we need to understand where it is in terms of when we can start bringing our employees back. So in this case, what I've actually done is I've started to look at what's about to happen. You can see QuickBooks is automatically predicting certain expenses for me. I've got my rent coming out. I've got other expenses coming out that I can't. And there's also some income there where I know I can rely on, and that income's being shown as coming in as well. Now, with all these expenses and everything coming out, it's giving me a baseline basically of what to expect. And if I didn't have any employees and I didn't bring anyone back, what's that going to look like for me? Now I've got that information in place, I can start building in scenarios and start understanding exactly how much I can absorb as a business, and how much of an impact employees coming back into the business is going to do to me. So now I'm looking through my cash flow forecast. You'll notice that if I've got any invoices that haven't been outstanding or are outstanding and haven't been paid yet, they're going to come into the forecast for me. So I've got the idea of having predicted transactions. They're ones QuickBooks are creating based on historical data and trying to give me an idea of what to expect going forward. Then I have the information about any invoices or bills that may be outstanding. That's going to help me in this case, because then if I have got invoices that are still to be paid and I can expect that money on the due date, and when it comes to bills, I know that if I've got any other financial commitments, they're going to be built into the cash flow as well. Then it comes to the really tough part for me. Now, thankfully on this particular company, I actually have the employee section open, and I'm using the payroll built into QuickBooks to be able to understand how much money I'm going to be needing for this particular business. And my whole payroll solution is built directly in here. Now, when it comes to looking at my last couple of payroll runs, you'll notice they were quite straightforward. And instead of paying my employee the full amount that they were due, I was actually paying them the 80% furloughed, and I was then claiming that back off the government. So up until now, my costs have been covered and recovered. Going forward though, I'm going to have to start thinking about at what point do I bring this employee back? How much can I afford to bring them back? Because remember, that every day that they work for us is a day we can't then claim back off the government. And also I've got to remember that those claims that I'm getting from the government are slowly going to start to be reduced. For example, any national insurance or pension contributions that we've been claiming back for furlough at the moment, we're going to start losing that ability to claim that back. And then as a stage result, it's going to go from 80% to 70% we're allowed to claim back, although we're still going to keep that employee paid at 80%, so we're going to suffer 10%. And then it's going to go down to 60. With all those differences that are about to happen within our business, we need to make sure we're comfortable, and we need to make sure we're going to be able to afford to keep this business and keep this employee on. So what I'm going to do now is I know in my head how much to expect, and I can start running that in terms of the scenarios going forward. So to do that, I'm going to jump into my cash flow, and I'm going to use the add transaction option to create a type of transaction called planned. Planned is a type of transaction you can only use within cash flow in QuickBooks. Therefore, every time I put a planned transaction in, it's not going to affect the rest of my QuickBooks. So I can make these assumptions. I can start having a bit of a play, if you like, and I can start thinking about what the impact is going to be to my business. So what I've done here is I've started to predict what's going to happen. And I know pretty much confidently that for June 2020, I'm expecting what my employee cost is going to be. Because I've already run that one, I'm pretty confident on that one. It's really after that that I'm worried about. But just so it's in my cash flow and so I can know I can rely on it, I'm going to set that as an expense now. I'm going to put the expense in, and then I'm going to assume that I'm going to get my JRS, my job retention scheme element for it coming back as well. So I'm kind of confident for the end of June. Then when it comes to the more complicated bit is when I'm starting to predict going forward and how much I can afford from a July point of view before I start ending up with negative cash flow. And really, I'm going to be using this cash balance element here to understand. So in this case, it looks like from a projection point of view, I'm going to struggle to make that salary payment. I'm going to struggle to pay my employee by 31st of July. But in fairness, I'm only looking, when I look at these projections here, as to the salary that's going to come out. So I've got 31st of July salary coming out. And what I've done is I've put the full amount of salary there, 1,500, my normal salary for this particular employee. Therefore, worst case scenario, if the employee was to come back on a full-time basis, that's how much I would be paying over. Now that's not taking into account any sales or anything else that's going to come through. So that's when I can start having a bit of a play around and start seeing what else can I include on here. So from here, I'm going to look at adding transactions. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at, well, what if my JRS fund was £500? Would that be enough for me? Is that enough for me to keep on that line from above? I'm going to say that I receive it on the 30th of the 6th, and I'm going to press save. So if I did receive £500, I'm still going to be short at this point come the month end. So I've got to start thinking about, well, what else is going to affect? Well, you'd expect if I'm bringing a new employee in, that I'm going to also start to get new income coming through as well. Because pre-COVID-19, I was always comfortable with it. So I need to start thinking about what's my average sales. I need to put a realistic target into what my sales figure is going to be in this new world at reduced capacity. If I was a hairdresser, for example, I'm not going to be able to cram that salon full with people anymore. I'm going to have to look at a more cautious approach. So I'm going to have to think about the fact that my normal sales figure of X is now going to be reduced down to something else. Now, QuickBooks can help you with that as well, because remember the reporting requirements we've got in here. If I was to jump into report and I looked at my profit and loss by month, and I looked at my last 365 days, for example, that's going to give you an indication of how much sales you can normally rely on. Now, bear in mind, this is a demo company, so there's not much in here that I'm going to be able to really understand. But from your point of view, you're going to understand what your rough sales is. And then when you've got that rough idea, then apply a realistic percentage. If you're only going to be able to have capacity at 50%, the maximum you're going to be able to bring in is going to be 50%. So from a prudent point of view, you might be wanting to look at taking less than that as a bare minimum before you can break even. And that's what this cash flow forecast is all about. So in my case, I can say, well, I'm at reduced capacity, but I'm expecting to bring in, so I'm at reduced capacity, I'm expecting to bring in £1,000. Now that I've put that £1,000 in, let's have a look how that's affected our cash balance. And you can see at that point, I would be able to afford to make payroll. And they're the sort of things that you can do with a cash flow forecast. You can use it as a way in which you can start trying to predict what's going forward. Don't forget, within QuickBooks as well, we also have the ability to do a budgeting option. So once you've got that all in place, start trying to put that into a budget so that you can then start looking forward. So if I edit the budget that I created before, you can see I can start looking at all the income and expenditure that I'm expecting to see and making sure that I'm comfortable with being able to afford everything going forward. That's going to set you some realistic targets, and that's also going to give you an opportunity to be honest with your employees, to understand that, you know, for them to come back full time, we need to be reaching this capacity, and you can have those conversations with them. It also means from a HR point of view, you can try and make sure your contract is as perfect as it's going to be with your employees, so that they know that they're coming back on a flexible basis. They know that they're coming back basically based on what the needs of the business is going to be. These are really tough times at the moment. They're difficult for clients to be able to understand what's going on. So the best thing we can do is get as much information into our bookkeeping software as much as possible, and give us the opportunity to make these sort of decisions. At least now we've got some of the tools to understand it. Now I've been playing with the cash flow forecast a little bit more, I'm starting to understand some of the limitations of it though. The biggest limitation, it's something you must be aware of, is if we jump back into the cash flow forecast, this cash balance here is only talking about transactions and amounts connected to a live bank balance. What I mean by that is if you've got any bank accounts that aren't connected via bank feed, they won't be affected and they won't be showing in this cash flow planner. Now, that kind of makes sense when you're looking at the fact it's trying to predict going forward, but you've got to make sure you take into account anything outside your normal banking. For example, on this company, I actually have quite a lot of income and expenditure showing through here outside the business. Therefore, I would be really worried about missing something different. In theory, I've got £53,000 sat extra in one of my other business bank accounts, and that's not being reflected at all in this cash flow element here. So do be aware of that. Also be aware it's only looking at 3 months at a time forward. Therefore, you may be worried about the longevity of what's going on. Do keep that in mind. And finally, it's a very manual process in terms of putting scenarios in place and starting to think about what it is you need to account for. So do yourself a favor and have some sort of process in place so you can understand exactly what transactions you're putting through here. I'm really grateful that this feature is in QuickBooks now. It gives clients an opportunity to have a look at their forward planning, to start trying to get back on their feet, to start trying to think about what's best for their business going forward. But you're still going to have to do some manual planning. You're still going to have to think about what that job retention scheme is going to be in terms of the refund. You're going to start having to think about how much your salary is going to be. Now, if you're paying your employees via QuickBooks, it's going to make your life easier, but you're still going to have to manually calculate that. So do yourself a favor, get everything all in line, get everything set up now so you can look into the future and make sure you can come at this as best as possible. If you need any help with cash flow forecasting, if you need any help with anything we've talked about today, do remember our sponsors, Bofix, are always going to be there to help. If you need a copy of QuickBooks, they can also do you a cracking deal to make sure you're not overpaying for that subscription. I've been experimenting with using bills and expenses and everything else to try and look at predicting that cash flow forecast more accurately. The only problem with using transactions like that are those particular transactions actually affect the whole of QuickBooks and not just cash flow. So you've got to be careful when you're using stuff like that. And that's it. We've had a quick look at the cash flow forecast. We've looked at it in a little bit more detail and we've tried to take into account for your flexible furlough. Now the flexible furlough is going to be really complicated and I'm going to look into it in a lot more detail in terms of how we can plan and how we can get that sorted. But what we need to understand first is how that's going to affect our cash flow. So we need to be thinking about how much money from a cash point of view our business can withstand to bring those employees back on. My name's Aaron, and don't forget, if you do like this video, like, subscribe, comment, whichever you want to do to get in kind of contact with me. That way we can build this channel and make sure we can cover the stuff that's actually relevant to you as a small business. Good luck out there. Hopefully, fingers crossed, this will give you the opportunity to get your business up and running, keep it going, keep the fight going, and fingers crossed we can see everything on the other side. My name's Aaron, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye for now.
I say yeah. I told him I can be a fighter if you want. I'll be there to catch you if you fall. I can make it brighter when it's dark, I told him I would do it all for you, and I know you do it for me too. I can be a fighter if you want, I can be a fighter. I can be a fighter if you want. I can be a fighter if you want. Oh, the way that I feel, yeah, I know that it's real, 'cause I can get him out of my head. I don't care what we do, everything's feeling new. Even if we stay in bed, my heart is saying yeah.